This is Metal Mike, and in this episode we talk to a metal legend, Don Dokken. We hear all about Dokken's new album, When Heaven Comes Down, that's coming out in October. We also hear about the classic albums like Back for the Attack. We discuss the track Dream Warriors. We talk about 1990 when the band split and he did Up From the Ashes. Lots of cool stuff, man. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Check it out.
Well, Don, welcome to the 80's Glam Metalcast. How are you?
I'm doing good, Mike. Everything's good. I just got home last night from Massachusetts, and we had a great concert, about 7,000 people, and it was awesome.
That's
perfect
awesome.
Weather, 70 degrees, no rain. I was a happy guy.
That is awesome, man. So, big news for Dokken. When Heaven Comes Down's coming out on the 27th. What can fans expect?
Well, you've heard the record, and I think it's an amazing record, and I know every band says that. You know, it's been 10 years since Broken Bones, then we put out the Lost Tapes, but it's been a long time since we put out a new record. It took a long time to write, but I think every song in this album is killer. The proof in the pudding is we put out our first video, Fugitive. It's already got a 500,000 hits.
Yeah, both that and Gypsy, man, sound really cool. You know, got the classic sound and the melodies. That's what I love. It's like those melodies that just, you listen to it a few times, man, and it's stuck in your head.
It's in your head, especially both of them. Gypsy, yeah, I mean, it's a great chorus. You know, we took a weird turn and did an animated style. We actually had a girl from Poland draw that by hand, but that video's going through the roof. Maybe because we waited, it was a good thing.
One thing I got to ask you is about the title. So most fans will recognize that When Heaven Comes Down is a track off Tooth and Nail. Any reason to choose that for the album title?
It's always been a kind of a habit of mine. I've always named the records, and, you know, Breaking the Chains, then there was Tooth and Nail. The only album that was called different was Under Lock and Key. But the truth was, we wrote a song called Under Lock and Key. At the last minute, we changed the chorus, so that's why it's called Under Lock and Key, Back the Attack. So I don't know why, it's a habit of mine. Long Way Home, Hell to Pay, Lightning Strikes Again. We've done 13 albums now. But I always seem to name our records after a song I've written. But the reason for Heaven Comes Down was because I'm watching the world, you too, go to hell in a handbasket. Murder, fentanyl, drugs, people taking, you know, AR-15s and killing children in grammar schools. That shit didn't happen in the 80s, man.
Nah, you're right. It stuff is messed up, and that's just that's putting it lightly.
You know, we got the Russians trying to take over the world, the Chinese, and the Ukraine war, and it's just like in the fentanyl, everybody's dying of fentanyl addiction. At the Russians, that's a good way of doing it, you know, to undermine our American society by shipping fentanyl into the country and killing everybody. So everything's changed, and that's why I said, that's called the album Heaven Comes Down, because it actually feels like heaven coming down.
Yeah. For the rest of the songs on this, we've got a lot of, like, is there a lot of deep meaning or you know, heavy stuff? Because with you, I mean, let's face it, I always look at you as more of kind of like a moody writer. Like, you're not really like the party anthem guy. So is this, what kind of lyrical content's on the rest of this album?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people, I hate it when they call us a hair band, because we were far from a hair band. If they listen, you know, we wrote songs like Kiss of Death, Lightning Strikes Again, Tooth and Nail. We weren't a pop band. So I kind of take offense to that hairband thing. We kind of got stigmatized as we came out in the 80s and we had long hair. But most of these songs in the record are all just about things I am inspired by, you know. Fugitive I wrote because I moved out of California and I never thought I would. And now I live, you know, I bought like a villa up in a mountain with no neighbors, you know, and John said one day we were working, and John goes, "Man, you become a fugitive." And I said, "Yeah, I'm a fugitive from life." And he goes, "That's a good title for the song." So I wrote it. So I just get inspired when people say something, you know. I remember when I wrote Kiss of Death, I don't know what people thought. I actually wrote that song about AIDS because it was the middle of the 80s and everybody was talking about AIDS. And I said one day to Mick, Mick, I said, "Dude, there's this new thing and it's killing people. My uncle died of it." And I said, "Use a condom if you're, you know, getting girls." And Mick said to me, "I'll never get AIDS. I only sleep with good-looking women." And I laughed my ass off. Oh, I see. So if they're good looking, they won't get the disease. I go, I don't think that disease cares if you're beautiful or fat and ugly. I said, you can get it. But he said that, and I just looked at him and went, what are you talking about? It's a disease, God's sake, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what I wrote Kiss to Death about. The lyrics are self-explanatory. You think you have this really great girl, and she comes to your room and gives you the, you know, and she schmoozes you, and you sleep with her, and you die, you know? She gave you the kiss of death. So a lot of things like that, what people say to me in a conversation will inspire me to write a song.
When it comes to shows, I know you guys are out doing shows. You're probably going to be, you know, touring for into next year. You're going to bring George Lynch along with you to open up and do stuff like you did, you know, this year and last year?
No, just one show until the end of the year.
How's the relationship with you guys
hey,
now?
George is George.
Yeah, is it better, like, you know, when you're in separate bands and then, like, you know, just to be able to be on a gig together and just play a couple songs, does that work best for your relationship?
Well, like we talked about it, you know, he first came out and did a couple songs at the end of the show. Then he put Lynch Mob back together. So they've been opening his whole band, and then he comes on stage, plays a couple songs. But as George and I said, we're too old to argue anymore.
That's funny.
Can't take the stress, but you know, George is very eccentric. I'm eccentric, and you know, it's no secret we didn't get along from day one, and it ran its course. But all these years later, it's like, you know, we're not BFFs. You know, we don't hang out. Even though he moved to New Mexico, I live in New Mexico. He moved to New Mexico. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's a weird coincidence right there.
Very strange, but you know, George is George. I'm me. You know.
Yeah.
But it ran its course. We did the reunion with George playing a couple songs, but you know, I just said, okay, we're done. You know, with that. John Levin's my guitar player. He's been in Dokken longer than George.
I know. I was just thinking he's probably like 20 years, hasn't he?
20 years. George was the band 8.
Wow, that is crazy. And everything that John's doing, man, on these new tracks sounds killer. Sounds killer.
Yeah, we really introduced the record, and I mean, John will tell you openly, he grew up, because he's the youngest in the band, he grew up listening to Dokken, and his favorite guitar player was George. So he's got that George Lynch style. As George said once to the press, John Levin plays me better than me.
And it fits. I mean, that's what you need. You need that kind of a sound. That's what fits your music.
The sound of the guitar, his scales, you know, but I tell John, do what you want, man. You know, you can spread your wings, you know, on other songs and just be John, you know, but that's just the way he plays, you know.
I was looking back, just kind of doing some research about like power ballads, and one thing that everybody kept saying and keeps going to is that Motley Crue, you know, was the first 80s glam band, whatever you want to call it, you know, to put out a power ballad or get big with a power ballad, you know, with Home Sweet Home. But, you know, I'm looking back and I'm thinking like Alone Again was out before. Wouldn't you think you guys kind of were the first like LA 80s band to do a power ballad?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Cinderella put out a ballad, Every Rose Has Its Thorn, The Poison.
Yeah.
You know, during that time, you know, MTV wanted ballads.
Yeah.
And we delivered the album Tooth and Nail, done, and the vice president of our company said, "Where's the ballad?" And I said, "We didn't write one for this record." And he said, "Well, get the hell out of my office and go write one."
Oh boy, I've heard that before.
And I went, okay. So we were done. So I had to go home and dig through all my little cassette tapes of all the hundreds of songs I'd written. And I just found this cassette, and it said Alone Again. I went, what's that? I put it in the cassette player, and I went, oh, that's pretty good. So Jeff and I went in the studio and revamped it, and we put it in the record at the last second, and it turned out to be an anthem, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I've heard that, Don, from a lot of people where, you know, labels are always encouraging the power ballads.
Well, it was popular, and, you know, the original Alone Again, I think I wrote it when I was 21, and it just ended up in a box somewhere in my closet. So we basically just kept the lyrics and the chorus, and Jeff and I just kind of revamped it. And I remember we were on tour for a year, and we'd done a bunch of videos, and the label said, we're done. And I said, well, what about Alone Again? And they said, well, we don't have a budget and all that stuff. So we were playing our last show at the, some gig in Hollywood at the Palladium. So they just set a couple of guys down with video cameras and shot us, and we just stitched it together, and that was Alone Again came out. I told the label, if you don't put it out, it's a big mistake. And they go, everybody loves that song. And they're like, yeah, we're done. But, yeah, everybody was doing ballads. I mean, not just Motley. There was a million bands. But that's what MTV wanted.
Yeah.
So do Alone Again and just throw it out there, see what happens. And it exploded.
Yeah. What other kind of things did you feel pressure from back then from the labels? Did they push you to look a certain way? Because it seems like it was like everybody was leather and spikes, and then everybody was lace and glam. Well, was there any pressure to change the image?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was our mistake. We started out, we were just jeans, leather jackets, whatever. And, everybody started getting more and more spent. David Lee Roth did that with the spandex and the lace and the very over-the-top outfits. And I don't know, I think it was a mistake. We did Earn Rotten Key. We're all in these stupid outfits. And we did it. And I remember we spent like $10,000 in those outfits. We used them one time on stage. And I said, I can't perform in this outfit. It sucked. And we just abandoned it. But that kind of stuck to us like glue with that picture of us under lock and key.
Yeah.
We looked kind of glam, big hair, Aquanet, but it wasn't us. And I remember my manager saying to me, whenever I see you, Don, you're on your Harley, you're just wearing like leather pants, biker boots, leather jacket. You should just dress like that on stage. So I took all that glam shit and just threw it away right away. We were trying to stay current, but it wasn't us.
Yeah.
It was a mistake.
Yeah. It seems like after that, for Back for the Attack, you had a more scaled back look, like you said, with leather and jeans and stuff like that. That was probably more who you were. Yeah.
Yeah, we went like full blown, just dress what you wanted to dress. I was in black, leather pants, boots, and that was it. I just got rid of all that stuff, I didn't want to do it in the first place, but it's what was going on in MTV,
Yep.
Everybody was glammy, except for Priest. They were all studs in leather.
Yep. For sure.
And I had to laugh that, Halper finally said once when he came out and finally told the world that he was gay, and he said, I used to go buy all my stage clothes at the S&M shops. and then the whole band went out and started doing the studs and the leather and went over the top with that. But I respected Metallica. We toured with them, we played stadiums, and they just, wore jeans and a T-shirt, and they were what they were. They didn't follow the trend, and I respected them for that. And I think it was a mistake for us to try to be something that we weren't. Yeah. Like Metallica just did what they wanted and dressed the way they wanted.
One song I got to ask you about is Dream Warriors. How did Dream Warriors come about in a sense of like, did the Nightmare on Elm Street approach you guys to do a song, or was that a thing where like bands had to put a bid out to be in a movie like that? How did Dream Warriors come about? No,
the director of Nightmare on Elm Street was a Dokken fan, and he approached us and said, I have a movie coming out, and it's called Dream Warriors. That was the only song probably in my career that they told me what the chorus had to be. Mm-hmm. And he said, the movie's called Dream Warriors. And I said, but I don't know what that means. So they sent me a rough edit of the movie and the script so I could read what was going on about Freddie coming through the beds and Freddie's coming to them in their dreams. So I just watched the rough cut of the movie and read the script, and we came up with the song Dream Warriors.
Yeah, that's amazing because I don't know, to me that song, maybe it's just because when I got into music as a kid, that was a song that I heard a lot, and I to this day though, man, I love it, and it feels pretty natural. It doesn't feel like it's contrived or like forced. It feels pretty natural. It's got like that, it's kind of eerie and creepy in the verses, which fits to to what the movie's all about, and obviously the video is just like, that's probably the biggest, craziest video you guys ever did.
Yeah, that was the first video when it came out, when they still had VHS and you could rent videos at a store like Blockbuster, and we were one of the first bands that video movie sold 1 million copies.
Wow.
Which was great for us because our song was on it, and we were making a lot of money, in royalties, And then when they did the second pressing of Nightmare on Elm Street, they took our song off the movie. Because at the end, I was like, oh, that sucks. Because they didn't want to pay the royalty, you know. But it was great playing with Robert Englund. I've met him many times since, and it's pretty straightforward. When I read the script, I lie awake and dread the lonely nights. I'm not alone. I wonder if these heavy eyes can face the unknown. All the lyrics are just about the movie.
Yeah.
So it was pretty easy to write. I basically just wrote lyrics about the movie.
Yeah, it's awesome. So awesome.
And then George wrote like 4 riffs, and I said, look, it's a monster movie. And so he wrote that dark guitar riff, you know. Dark.
No, I love that song, man. It's great. A lot of people think Back for the Attack is the best. What do you think?
It's a good record, you know. It was one of our heavier records, and we were getting ready to go on the Monster Rock tour when that came out. You know, I just think we were in the zone, you know. We'd sold a couple million records, we had platinum albums, and I think Back the Attack that we had more freedom, that we didn't have to commit to write some of the songs I wrote, like In My Dreams, Just Got Lucky, Alone Again, The Hunter. You know, all the singles that were videos that I had written, we had the freedom to be more heavy on Back the Attack.
Yeah, no power ballad really on that one. You know, Heaven Sent is more of like it's laid back, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a power ballad.
No, and the video's dark. We filmed it in a graveyard.
Yes, it's
we actually did our last show. I remember that video. We played our last show with Aerosmith on the Permanent Vacation tour, and we had to jump in the bus and drive to New Orleans, and we filmed it in a graveyard, you know. But then they told us, you're not allowed to go in the graveyard. You know, it's sacrilege. So if you look at the video next time, you see a lot of crosses in the front, and we just put all our crew members' names on them.
Gotcha. Good. Good to know. I did not know that.
Yeah, we filmed there was a cemetery, there was a fence, and we had to play in front of the fence because we weren't allowed to go in the graveyard. So
you get to like 90, Dokken, splits up, and you do, your solo album Up From the Ashes. You got a lot of big players, man, like Mickey D and John Norum. Was the goal like, I'm going to create this super group and I'm going to blow away, the Dokken lineup, or was it just by chance you just figured out like these were the best guys? What were you thinking going into that selection of the lineup for the band?
Well, I knew that, after the band split up on our very last show doing the Monster Rock, but then we ended up in a lawsuit for like a year and a half because the band didn't want me to use the name Dokken anymore. And I said, well, that's my last name. I have a right to use my last name.
Right.
But they sued me, and they won, and the judge said you can't use the name Dokken. And I was really pissed, because the judge was about 80 years old. He didn't know shit. He was a moron. And I said, wait a minute. I can't use my God-given name? It's not made up. It's not like Nick Mars or Nicky Six. It's
right.
My real name.
Right.
But the band had it in their head that they wanted to go on as Dokken, the three of them with a new singer. And I fought him tooth and nail, use the pun, and I said, there's no way you're going to go on. I mean, I started Dokken 5 years before I even met those guys. So I was upset, but, I'm not a lawyer, and, I didn't think I needed to trademark the name Dokken to protect myself. So the judge used the term, all 4 of us were equal members. It wasn't like another band where I owned everything. We split everything 4 ways. I make $1, they all made $1. And when I left, the judge said, well, you're a corporation, basically, the 4 of you. So if you're out of the band and the other 3 members are in, he used if your band was called Coca-Cola, you can't keep the name Coca-Cola. And I went, it was just legal bullshit. So I signed my deal with Geffen, and I knew Lynch was putting a band together, Lynch Mob, and I just thought, I'm going to put a supergroup together. And I did. Peter Baltus from Accept,
Yep.
John Norum from Europe, Mickey D just came out of King Diamond.
Yep.
And then I found this guitar player, I think it was Lars Ulrich, that gave me a cassette. And Lars said, hey, check out this band out of Boston, Texas. And that was Billy White's band, and he was amazing. So I was trying to decide, do I take John Norum or do I take Billy White, who was 18? And I said, all right, fuck it, I'll take them both. And I put a supergroup together. And I was really upset. I didn't want to call the album Don Dokken. It was supposed to be just Dokken.
Mm-hmm.
So, and David Geffen wasn't happy either. Because when you put your surname on a record, a lot of people see it as a solo record. Like you just said it already. Oh, it's your solo album. It wasn't a solo album. It was just a Dokken album.
Right.
But I had to put my name Don on it, and I was really unhappy about that. But the judge said, you can't use the name Dokken. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, why don't you sue my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather? You know, I said, well, it's my last name. You can't take my name away from me. But the guy was an old crony judge, and so he did what they call, legal terms, split the baby. The three of them couldn't use Dokken, and I couldn't use Dokken.
Huh.
So that's why I put out the album Don Dokken.
Wow. I did not know that.
That's how that went down. I can't imagine that they wanted to go on with Only Logan as the lead singer, and I was like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I fought it, and, you know, we all spent a lot of money in court for a year and a half, and the judge split the baby, you know. They couldn't use it, I couldn't use it. So, you know, several years, I just kind of stepped out of the scene for a while and started working on my next record after Up in the Ashes. But the truth is, you know, that band, we had a lot of success. We sold out Japan. We sold out every place in Europe. We sold out America, doing like, you know, 3,000-4,000 people. And then Lynch had his hit, Wicked Sensation, which is a great song, you know. So, but then, you know, then the real reason everything fell apart was I was on Geffen, and they signed Nirvana and Guns N' Roses, and they kind of saw the same thing, like, oh, Dokken's a hair band. You're old school. You're 80s. You know, this is the new. You got to remember, in '91, it was Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden. You know, all the grunge bands came out, and everybody said, well, the 80s bands are done. And then they started using that stigma of they're a hair band.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, you obviously didn't listen to a Dokken record. We were far from a pop band.
Right.
You know, we had our dark songs. We had our In My Dreams, Just Got Lucky. Then we had Heaven Sent, Tooth and Nail, Lightning Strikes Again, Kiss the Death. We had a metal side to it.
Yep.
But, you know, I think all the 80s took a hit. You know, 80s bands. I was pretty upset, actually, when Metallica did that video. And in their video, they're throwing darts at a picture of Kip Winger.
Yeah.
And that was just, I thought that was really in bad taste.
Yeah.
Remember that video, and they're throwing darts, and
Yeah.
it's a picture of Winger. So here Metallica's exploding, you know, they're basically telling the whole world that, you know, Winger sucks, you know.
Yeah.
That must have really hurt Kip, you know. And I took offense to that. That wasn't very cool of them to do that. But, and then you had Beavis and Butthead, where Beavis has a Metallica t-shirt, and Bud is and then the goofy guy in the cartoon's wearing a Winger t-shirt. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like a put down on Kip. And I thought that was wrong, because Kip is a great musician. They wrote great songs. He's a great singer. They had great hits, but it kind of killed his career for a couple of years.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think Kip Winger is a super talent. I've loved Winger, and I agree with you. That is kind of bullshit. And right, it sends that kind of message that, oh, this stuff's lame, you know what I mean? And it wasn't helping any, and you know, the cause of the 80s bands at that point.
Yeah, it was insulting. Like, you know, in that Metallica video, it was kind of like saying, if you like Winger, you know, that's, you know, you're a nerd.
Yeah.
And that wasn't cool, because Winger put out some amazing records.
Yeah.
Kip is very talented. They're in Japan right now, I just heard, because my room manager's there, and they're selling out every night in Japan. But it really hurt them, that Beavis and Butthead thing, and, you know, the video. I mean, why did they put that shot in there? They obviously had a cross, you know, to bear against him. I would have never done that. I wouldn't, it wasn't, I'll just put it this way. Metallica is now the biggest band in the world. They play stadiums, they can play anywhere they want. They play the Antarctic. They're the biggest rock band, heavy metal band in the world, but they didn't need to throw Kip under the bus. That was my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. So Dysfunctional, I was reading the other day, I didn't know this either, that Dysfunctional was supposed to be a follow-up album, like a solo album of yours, but then in turn, label saying, hey, we got to bring back all the guys. So what did you think about when that happened? Were you okay with that, or were you against it at first?
Well, it started out strange, because that was, like I said, my second, you said solo album. I'd gotten my name back by then. I'd gone back to court and got my name Dokken back, but it was going to be whatever you want to call it, my second solo album. And by then, we'd all made a lot of money, and I got tired of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a record, and I said, screw it, I'm going to build my own recording studio. So I did. So I owned my own recording studio, so there was no money. There was no budget. And I just started writing that album. And then Jeff wanted to come back in the band. Mick came back in the band. And basically, Jeff and I wrote that entire record. We were done. The album was finished, And then we signed to Columbia, and John Collider said, I preferred if you had all the original members. And I said, I don't think I can do that, because George and I don't get along,
Mm-hmm.
It won't work, because I knew George and I don't get along. So the album was finished. George came back in the band. He played one solo on the record. That was it. George really had nothing to do with Dysfunctional. I basically wrote the entire record, and with Jeff and Mick. And George came back, played one solo. I gave him a credit. On Too High to Fly, he wrote that solo.
Mm-hmm.
But Columbia, we signed to Columbia, and they said, we don't want to sign you unless it's all original members. So I went, shit. All right. So I talked to George. He came back, and the rest is history. It was a great album.
Yeah.
And I got to write whatever I wanted. And the cool thing about Dysfunctional was we didn't have any rules, like write a power ballad or write a commercial song like In My Dreams. I just wrote whatever the hell I wanted. And I experimented with sitars and crazy instruments and, because I had no budget, I had no record deal. So Columbia said, we want George back in the band, and he came back. And that was the end of that.
Yeah, it's a great album. And I got to ask you one thing I've always wondered about Too High to Fly.
I love that record.
Yeah, Too High to Fly almost it feels like almost putting off like a Jim Morrison vibe. Are you a Doors fan, or were you trying to bring in a little bit of it? Because I always felt like it just reminded me of the Doors a little bit, that song. I don't know.
Huge Doors fan. When we play it live, I actually break out to a breakdown in the song, and I actually recite some of Jim's lyrics. When he said, I do it live, and I say the song, This Is the End, and My Only Friend, the end of darkness, yada, yada, yada. So I do this little tribute to Jim Morrison, The Middle Too High. And if you ever see the video of, if you ever watch Live from the Sun, when Red Beach's in the band, I sing a part of a Doors song in that song. Because Jim Morrison was a poet.
Yeah.
He was more of a poet. And his lyrics, I always loved them. And people forget that, they were the house band at the Whiskey.
Yep.
So it was Too High to Fly is an homage to Jim Morrison, because nobody really knows why he died. He was young. He was fine, living in Paris, and he just, dies in a bathtub. And that's what I heard that when he died. I said, when I wrote Too High to Fly, and I've lost a lot of friends to drugs. I've never done drugs myself, but, I think everybody admits, in the 80s, everybody was coked up out of their mind. They used to say on the Sunset Strip, if you buy cocaine, it probably came from Carlos Escobar.
I bet.
But it wasn't my drug of choice. I was more of a champagne wine guy, And unfortunately, that's why the band broke up, because Jeff and Mick and George had gone down the rabbit hole, and they were coked up out of their minds, man.
Gotcha. That's got to be tough.
So it's hard to keep a band together, and I mean, even on when we did Monsters of Rock, and they had all these cameras, and George would go into the solo, and the cameras would swing over, and there's no George on stage. And I'm looking around going, where the hell's George? I mean, I hear him playing, but he's not on stage. Because he would walk behind his marshals and his roadies giving him lines of coke. And that drove me crazy. And I said, guys, I mean, we're only playing, 90 minutes. Can you guys just not do coke for an hour and a half? And it drove me crazy. It just made me crazy. They were all coked up out of their minds. And so that's what kind of brought the end of Dokken, because I always say, if I was into cocaine, we probably all would have got along. But the three of them would go off in the hotel room and sit in the back of the bus and do coke for days. And I'd just be in my bunk reading a book, Mm-hmm. It wasn't my thing. And it destroyed the band. We're not the only band that's been destroyed by drug abuse.
Right.
When you watch Derby and Nikki Sixx owned it, the guy was, got up heroin and was dead at the hospital,
Yeah.
He owned it, he was a heroin addict. So a lot of the bands were doing coke or heroin, and it just wasn't my thing. I'm not trying to puff myself up, but I was addicted to writing music.
Well, it shows.
I couldn't wait to get home and start writing again. Pick up my guitar, start writing music. I had a guitar in every room of the house. I played my guitar 2-3 hours a day. It was my cocaine,
Definitely. Well, Don, man, I appreciate your time. I wish you lots of luck with When Heaven Comes Down. Thanks for all the great music, man. Been a fan for many years, so I appreciate you.
All right, boss.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our time rocking with Dokken. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Rock on!